And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
One of my favorite two-player games is Le Havre. Le Havre is a great game designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and I'll expound the wonderfulness of that game in a review next week. I've already done a review, but I want to re-review it, but that's coming. This time we're looking at Le Havre. Le Havre, the port, the inland port, it's just for two players. It's a game that's based on Le Havre, and we're going to tell you whether it's good or not. We'll find out. At the beginning of the game, each player gets two boards. One board is to keep track of your goods. The other board is your building board, and we'll talk about the building boards in a second, but let's talk about these boards that you keep track of your goods with. On each of them, you're going to put 4 different good tokens to show the different goods you have in this game: grain, wood, clay, and fish. Now, the game actually provides you with cubes in case you love cubes and for some reason you're irritated they're not in the game, or the much more useful tiles, in my opinion, but it doesn't really matter. Now, as the game progresses, this is how you keep track of how many you have of each type. You simply add the row and the column. So I have 1 wheat. If my wheat was here, I would have 12, 9 plus 3. And the reason that this is such an interesting feature of the game is that you're going to have features which will let you move these tokens, sometimes straight up, sometimes diagonally left or right or down, or they move in different directions, and that will dramatically change how much of those goods you have. Now, the main game itself is played utilizing these boards. You'll notice that this one says A, B, C, D, E, and F around the outside. The other one says G, H, I, J, K, and L. That's to help us keep track of turns. It doesn't really matter which board you have. Each player, so the player here will look at the board, and on turn A, or round A, there's going to be 3 actions. You can see underneath the A that says 3 actions, and then that little symbol there lets him know that he goes first. So he'll get 1 action, then his opponent gets an action, and then he'll get the final action. On turn F, for example, there's 5 actions, and he doesn't go first, so his opponent gets 1, he gets 1, his opponent gets 1, he gets 1, and then his opponent gets the final one. Now, what can you do on your action? Actions are very simple. You can buy a building, or you can use a building. Now, each letter round of the game, some buildings come out. These buildings have A's on the back of them, and there's A, B, C, and D, and E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N. I guess it only goes up to L. But anyhow, these buildings come out. Now, if you want to build one of these buildings, you need to pay the cost at the top and the roof of the building. So, for example, here for the hardware store, you need to pay 1 wood and 2 clay. And you pay them by moving your pieces on the board, depending what direction you move them. If you move it over 1 to the left, you're paying 1. If you move it down, you're paying 3. And depending on where your token might be, for example, if you have a token here in the 18 and you need to pay 1 grain, you would have to actually pay 3 because the only way to go is down like that. All right? So that's you're allowed to build these. Some of them cost money. When you build one of these tokens, it goes on the 0 spot of your building board. So let's say I build the wood company. I'd put it here in the 0 section of my building board. You'll notice there's 0, 2, 3, 4, and 4 with a coin. As each round goes, this is going to turn, so the number matching each of your buildings is going to change. Now, you can build a building or you can use a building. When using a building, if I use this building, I would do whatever the action was on it. Now, in the instance of this action, the action here shows a brown arrow. That means move your wood token to the right. Now, how many times do I move it to the right? Well, the answer is right here, 3 times. If this clay mound was in the same spot, that says move it 3 times to the right and then 1 extra time. So I'm always going to move it once, and then the red arrow is for each time that it's listed here. So where the house is really can matter. If your building happens to be here, if I use it, I get to use the action 4 times, and I get a coin for my trouble. Now, you can use your opponent's buildings. You simply have to pay them a coin to do so. So I can pay my opponent to use his building. Whenever you use a building, that building moves all the way to wherever the 0 marker is at that point in time. And so after the end of each turn, when this moves, everything's going to change. If there happens to be a building to where it moves, then you're forced to immediately sell that building for half price, and you can sell those buildings for that price anyway. So there's all sorts of things. I'll show you a few of the buildings here. We'll put some of them out like this. There's lots of buildings. Most buildings involve moving around the different icons. You can see that some of the buildings let you move any color. Some buildings like this one here, you pay 15 food, which is fish or grain, and it's just going to be worth 20 points at the end of the game. There are lock symbols on there because you don't need to actually even put it on your board. This one lets you move the brown or the red token. So there's different things that will happen as the game progresses, and you get to move things in different directions. And that's how the game is going to happen. You keep taking actions back and forth. If you're wondering what this little board is, it just kind of gives you a heads up as to how much the buildings are going to cost on future turns, so you might want to save towards those buildings. But after the final turn of the game, a player will sell all their buildings for the cost listed on that building. So think of that as victory points. So the zoo here is worth 20, this one's worth 12 and 16. And plus any money that they've accumulated during the course of the game, and whoever has more is the winner. Now, I think the first thing we have to get out of the way is that you really shouldn't compare this game to Le Havre much at all. They really feel different. They use the same resources, and you're building buildings that have the same names, but that's all I really felt. In fact, this game almost felt a little bit more like Ora and Labora, using that dial mechanic, which is another game he designed. But I think it's a very different game in its own right. That being said, is it a good game?
I like this game a lot. It was just so much fun trying to get the clay pieces, to build the buildings, to get the food, and to feed your people. It was just so much fun.
I mean, well,
it was different but fun.
It's really, there's so many good things. I like how you keep track of all the different goods. That was great, moving them in different directions on that board. I've seen it done before in a stock market game by Friedman Fries, but this one here, it worked really well. I like the dial mechanic. Sometimes you would use a building and you didn't really have to use it just to keep it from getting, being forced to sell it. But other times
buildings got forced to.
Well, no, not in the second game. In the first game they did. Yeah, I mean...
We played the rules wrong.
We fixed it. But the thing was, I was just engrossed the whole time. You can't build all the buildings, but more buildings come out. You have to decide which buildings are best to build, and then what are you going to use? There were many times where I would use her building right before she was about to use it, or vice versa. The wheel mechanic and using those buildings, you're basically just manipulating these resources around to get the most money you can, and that's fun. I really enjoyed it. It doesn't feel much like Le Havre, and I don't think it's as good as Le Havre, but this is one of the best two-player. This is, how am I going to say it? There's two-player games, I put them in two different categories. There's those head-to-head games like Magic the Gathering, Mage Wars. I'm like, bah, 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 bah. Love those games. Then there's two-player games that are economic or light games like Lost Cities and things like that. The Cosmos two-player series, and this is the category I put that in, and I would say this is one of the best ones I've ever played. I really like it. All right. What about
I liked how at the end, near the end, you could get these big major buildings where, like if you have a lot of that, each one you get a point, and it just gives you like bigger points in the end.
Yeah, it kind of escalated, and it was neat. And you can look ahead to see what it's possible to build, and the game doesn't take that long. Let's see what the box says, and then we'll tell you what the real truth is. It says 30 minutes. I think that's right. And it's a pretty decently weighted game for 30 minutes. A heavier feeling game. This is great. This is great. You should get it. Go get it now. Any final thoughts?
Just that this is a really good game and good artwork.
There you go. Le Havre, the Inland Port.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find the latest board game news at Dicetowernews.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Fun Again Games, the world's best game source. Fun Again Games has over 5,000 games available. Check them out at funagain.com.
Shut the door!